on, everybody? Welcome to the latest episode of the No Huddle Show. Matt, how's it going?
Eliot, getting close to actual preseason
games. I know.
It's great.
Feels like camp, man. 2 weeks it's been going on already, but today is Tuesday. Pardon me. Today is Tuesday. The Eagles will be playing on Thursday versus the Green Bay Packers, which means just one day stands between us and an actual game, or at least something close to an actual game. We'll see how many people play. Doug was a little shy today talking about who was going to play and who wasn't going to play. He did say, though, Carson Wentz will start, so that's good.
Yeah, and Eliot, the real focal point of this entire week and leading up to the Packer game as far as who's going to play and who's not going to play, it's all about Alshon Jeffery. Now, we're going to talk a lot about Alshon throughout the course of the podcast today, but you look at Doug during his comments after practice, and he basically said that if there were a regular season game that Alshon's healthy enough to play, but he didn't commit to playing him,
right.
And Alshon has been pretty straightforward that he feels like he's healthy enough to go, but yet he hasn't taken a snap.
Yeah, and the Alshon thing,
reps.
Man, the Alshon thing is something I've just been getting killed on Twitter. Just people, I love Twitter. I love tweeting. I love talking to people on it, but sometimes it's so hard to really explain your full thoughts on a subject on that when you only have 140 characters. So I'm excited to do this podcast just because I have a lot to say about this Alshon situation. Yep. So before we actually get into it, just a few things I want to take care of. As I always say at the beginning of the episode, I love that you're listening to it if you're listening to it in a browser, but you should subscribe, and you can listen to us basically everywhere. You subscribe, you get the episode quicker, so you can go subscribe on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, Google Play, and Spreaker. And once you subscribe, we'd love it if you leave some reviews. I see some more reviews piling in. I've been reading them. I really appreciate the feedback. We get some of the tweets saying the good and the bad, people you want to hear. So I really do appreciate everyone that has subscribed in the recent weeks since we've been doing this a little more, and people that have been leaving comments. So go subscribe if you haven't yet. So, all right, now that is out of the way, I'm excited to talk about Alshon. So before we get into it, let's at least just say the cold, hard facts of what's going on. So Last Saturday, July 29th, Alshon hurt his shoulder. We were both there. We saw it. He went down. The trainer worked with him. He went back and did some team stuff that day, then practiced on Sunday at the Link, and then Monday the Eagles head off. And since then, so today's Tuesday, so it's been 8 days since Alshon has taken part in a team drill with this team. Now, you were talking a little bit earlier about what Doug was saying, but I know you've been in on Doug a little more than I have. So, I mean, Doug's been pretty consistent in saying Alshon's healthy, right?
Yep, he basically said last week that they're not playing regular season games until September, and there's no real rush to bring Alshon Jeffery back. But I do find it a little bit interesting, Eliot, that they have had Alshon Jeffery dress for practice. Mm-hmm. He'll go through some individual warm-up drills, and then that's it. No more 7-on-7s, no more 11-on-11s since he suffered the shoulder injury. So whether they're being completely honest about the injury or not, it seems as though they're going out of their way to not put him out there during these practices.
And Alshon, so today's Tuesday. I talked to Alshon today, and I said, first, how you feeling? And, of course, he says he's feeling great. So, I would expect him to say that whether he is feeling great or not. Players are always like that. I always remember a few years ago, after the Eagles game against the Colts, when Chip was still the head coach, I saw Michael Kendricks in the hallway after the game. He had injured a hamstring, surprise, during that game. And I said, Michael, how you feeling? Are you going to play next week? He said, I'll be fine. He missed the next 7 weeks. So the players do not always give the best feedback on how they're actually feeling. But Alshon said today that he's feeling fine. And then I said, look, are you concerned about all the team reps you've been missing? And his exact quote, or I guess paraphrasing, so I don't have it in front of me, but he basically said, you guys, speaking of the media, makes a bigger deal of this than we do. He's not concerned. He's a football player. He plays football. So Alshon's not concerned. And the other interesting thing, I think, with Alshon is Josina Anderson of ESPN yesterday tweeted out something from Alshon, essentially saying, I'm good. I'm just chilling. They want me to sit out so they can evaluate younger guys. So that's kind of where we stand. The Eagles are saying he's okay. Alshon's saying he's okay. And then we're getting some semblance of a reason that they want to evaluate younger guys. What do you make of this? Because I have a ton of opinions on this.
Yeah, Eliot, first and foremost, I don't think he plays Thursday night against the Packers. I agree. And the fact that he hasn't taken a single rep in team drills, it almost leads me to believe that while he's not necessarily separated a shoulder, I don't think this injury is anything that's going to linger into the regular season. I think we're just basically seeing the Eagles tell an established veteran who they know what they have in him, they know why they brought him in here, not to rush back. He has a bit of an injury history. He did didn't play 16 games last year because of a PED suspension. He's been banged up in the past. I think they're basically telling Alshon, take all the time you need. We're not going to rush you back and be ready week 1 against the Redskins.
Okay, so here's my issue with that. So you're telling Alshon that. You're basically saying, take it easy, whatever. Why are you only telling Alshon that? Why is other guys like Jason Peters, Jordan Matthews, Lane Johnson, Malcolm Jenkins, guys that have been with this franchise for a long time, guys who what you have in them, why are they practicing?
Well, those guys aren't injured.
And okay, so we're in an agreement that Alshon, he's not perfectly fine.
I agree.
Okay,
and I think that, whether he's 70%, whether he's 85%, if he were 100% fully healthy, fully
if he
healed
never
from
went
injury,
down that day,
he's practicing 11 on 11.
Okay, so if he never goes down that day, he's practicing 11 on 11.
That's what I believe.
So I believe that too, just simply because it would be really weird if he stopped doing team drills all of a sudden.
Right.
But so if he is healthy enough, if he is injured, so we're agreeing that the shoulder is bothering him.
Correct.
Now the question is, if the shoulder is bothering him, is that something the fans should be concerned about?
I don't think at this point, because it's not like he's not in street clothes. It's not like he's, not doing anything in practice. He's been out there today in Tuesday's 10-10-10 practice during special teams drills. He was doing some red zone work one-on-one with Carson Wentz, still looking to get his timing down. And I don't think that this is something that is going to linger into the regular season,
right.
But I think it's just a matter of he's not 100% healthy, and I don't think that Doug or the front office, and this is probably the right way to go about this for the first preseason game, I don't think that they see much risk-reward to playing him this week versus giving him that extra time to fully heal.
I agree. I do agree with that. My only thing is he does have the injury history. And he is a guy that in Chicago seemed to miss practice quite a bit.
Yep.
So I do not think that this injury is going to keep him from playing week 1 against the Redskins. I do not think this is something where, at least I don't know. I mean, if he re-injures it, obviously, maybe it's more susceptible to being re-injured. But I don't think this is something where, week 3 or 4 we'll still be talking about it. But to me, the thing is, should you be concerned physically about Alshon? No. But so many players on this team, whether, Torrey Smith, Carson, all the new guys, right? They talk so much about how training camp, they need to get on the same page. This is, there's a lot of new pieces around. Frank Wright's probably said it. Doug Peterson, I'm sure, has said it. And now you have a situation where Wentz has thrown, based off, I track every pass. Yep. Wentz has thrown 100, and I have it right here actually. Wentz has thrown 185 passes in training camp in either 7-on-7 or 11-on-11 drill. Of those 185 passes, do you want to guess how many have gone towards Alshon Jeffery?
And we're just talking about 7-on-7?
Just 7-on-7 and 11-on-11. Team drills where they're practicing the offensive plays.
I'd say under 25.
6. Jeffrey has had 6 passes thrown his way this training camp, and he's caught 5 of them.
Well, let's remember, though, he got hurt the first day.
All right, that's what I'm saying. So he
11.
has missed a lot of time, but the reality of the situation is still this, that 2 weeks into training camp, Carson Wentz, for whatever reason, has still only completed 5 passes to Alshon Jeffery in a team setting. So does that mean Alshon's going to have a bad year? No, I don't think that's what it means. But I don't see how you can't look at what's happening with Alshon and not feel like it's getting off on the wrong foot.
I think based on the fact that you look at his history and you look at the fact that he has 2 years of over 1,100
his recent history,
yards, his career,
okay,
and you look at what he's done through his career with subpar quarterback play around him, and you look at what he did during the course of this spring. The injuries weren't a concern during the springtime. He was out there going 100%, and you and I think, were both in agreement that you could see already the impact he was going to have on Carson Wentz, thanks to that catch radius, thanks to the fact that he's a legitimate, true number 1 wide receiver. This is something that this team has lacked ever since Deshaun Jackson or Jeremy Maclin were here. So the fact that he hasn't practiced for 8 days in camp, for a guy of his stature in this league and with his production in the past and what he's done during the spring since signing with the Eagles, I think we're reading a little bit too much into it if we're projecting out that this is going to somehow negatively affect his role on this team.
Well, and I think that's kind of where I don't have my mind made up yet. I can't decide if this is going to have a negative impact because on one hand, I agree with you. And I guess to a certain degree I agree with Alshon. It is just practice and it is just training camp. But on the flip side of that, it is important. I mean, practice matters. I think, Carson Wentz will tell you these reps matter. Coaches will tell you these reps matter. Marcus Johnson, who we had on the podcast last week, talked about how in his second year he can really see that practice reps matter, how much better they've made him. Now, Marcus Johnson is not yet the player Alshon is. But I still think it's, to just say it doesn't matter at all, I think is completely diminishing what training camp means and how important these reps are.
I'm not saying it doesn't matter at all, but I think for a young player like Marcus Johnson or a rookie like Matt Collins or somebody trying to make this roster, these guys are going to want every rep that they can get. But someone who's established themselves, is a veteran that has won in the NFL before, somebody who's a two-time 1,100-yard-plus receiver, I don't think that the practices carry quite the same weight for that type of a player.
And if this was Alshon's third year, Alshon's fifth year with the Eagles, I would agree with you more. But the only place I disagree is he is new to this team. And he does have to, get on the same page as Carson Wentz. Zach Ertz is a guy that's spoken at length about how much having, camaraderie and chemistry with the quarterback on the field matters. I mean, look,
he did go to North Dakota, so they had the spring.
So he worked out for 3 or 4 days there.
I mean,
and that's a little different.
No, but on top of OTAs, and they also built the camaraderie that Ertz talked about. And Ertz, I don't, belittle the fact that Ertz went to Sam Bradford's house in Oklahoma last year and worked out with him to build that camaraderie.
Right.
And I'm not also saying that Alshon Jeffery going to North Dakota means he's going to have automatically an all-pro caliber year. But my point is, it's not as if Carson hasn't been around Alshon. It's not as if they haven't thrown. And it's not as if during practice, when he was on the field, that he didn't have the command of the offense and didn't look like he was going to have a dramatic impact on this offense right away.
Yeah, and I do see that point, which is why I'm torn on it and why I think it's so interesting. But to me, the situation, and we were both here it was 2 years ago now. Wow.
Yep.
We were both here 2 years ago when Demarco Murray came in. And to me, I think there's a lot of parallels between Alshon and Demarco Murray. And let me explain why. First reason, they're both here for the money. Will you agree with that?
Sure.
Alshon is here because he wants a new contract. Demarco is here because the Eagles, paid him, if not the most, extremely close to the most. Both here for money.
Yep.
2, they both missed a good portion of the start of training camp. Demarco Murray, I don't remember if it was actually a deal where they were saying what the injury was, but he was in and out of practice, in and out of team drills, working off on the side by his own.
And that didn't sit well with teammates. I distinctly remember Malcolm Jenkins grabbing a chair from one of the hospitality events, putting it in the end zone, and basically taking his hand and wiping it down and letting, saying basically DeMarco Murray, hey, if you're going to stand here and be a spectator, why don't you sit down? So that didn't sit well, the way DeMarco Murray handled his first training camp.
And this is not, by comparing the two, I'm not saying this is what I predict for Alshon. I'm just saying I personally see a lot of similarities between how their time with the team is starting off. So, again, all right, this is the next question I had. I think it's a good segue. What should be expected of Alshon this year? What do you think is realistic to expect from him, and has your expectations changed for him based off of the first 2 weeks of camp?
Not one bit, because
Okay.
unless this turns out to be a separated shoulder that's going to cost him 3 or 4 weeks into the regular season, and the Eagles are, slow playing this thing and, putting him out there as a decoy in practice. But I don't think that we're at that point yet, because he is doing extra work on the side and all of those things. But if he's fully healthy, I think that playing 16 games, 75 to 85 catches, 1,100 to 1,200 yards, and around 10 touchdowns. I think that's what the Eagles brought him here to do.
You think? I mean, that would be not the best year of his career.
No, it'd be his
pretty
second.
close.
It'd be his second best year.
Yeah.
His best year, he had 1,400 yards and I believe 9 touchdowns.
So my expectations for Alshon were not as high as yours. So in some ways, I don't think they've changed a ton over the first 2 weeks, although I do think I'm getting to the point where I'm seeing enough red flags that I'm starting to think this isn't going to work out great. But I'm not ready to completely say that yet. I think Alshon, for me, one of his biggest roles in the offense is going to be just drawing attention from the opposing defense. So I think when this year is over and we grade how Alshon did, I'm not so sure he's going to finish with 70, 75 catches, 1,300 yards. I think Alshon can have a successful year with maybe not leading the team in catches, but he needs to draw attention. He needs to be a player that the Eagles didn't have last year, which is a guy that opposing defensive coordinators have to worry about and have to at least, not completely game plan against, but at least not, last year they could just put whoever they wanted on the Eagles receivers and it didn't matter. They could play single coverage. They didn't have to worry about those type of things. I think for Alshon to have a successful year, he needs to draw attention away. So I think you could see a guy like Zach Ertz, a guy like Jordan Matthews, like Torrey Smith, end up with a little more production than normal because of Alshon.
Would we agree that Alshon's the best receiver on this team? The fact that you pause,
well, okay,
I find that really interesting because I look at what the Eagles have, and nobody on this roster has had 1,000-yard receiving season. Nobody on this roster has caught double-digit touchdowns in a single year. And he's a legitimate outside X receiver that they haven't had since Deshaun.
But here's where we disagree on that. Alshon has had better seasons than people on the Eagles roster. And I know you're going to say the quarterback play, but his last 2 years, of the 5 years he's been in the league, he's topped 1,000 yards twice. Now, I know no one on the Eagles has, but here's my thing with Alshon. I do think he probably is the best receiver on the roster, but I do not think that there is as big of a gap. Like, when you define best player, like if you asked me who had the most talent on this roster, there would have been no pause. I would have said Alshon. If you ask me who the best receiver is, and when I'm saying that, I take into account production, durability, like how they, I don't want to say fit into the locker room, but, like off the field stuff. I take all that into consideration when I'm talking about who the best receiver is. It's like when we used to debate Bradford. Bradford is an accurate thrower. He is a smart guy. But the stats and the intangibles have never been there for him. So it's hard for me to say, yes, Sam Bradford is in a lot of ways a talented quarterback, but I don't think he's a great one. If you said to me, is Alshon the most talented receiver on the roster, I'd agree with you, but I'm not ready to say he's unquestionably the best.
See, I think he's a top 15 receiver when he's healthy. And even
I think he's a top, 16, 17.
Playing 12 games, he, hauled in 52 passes, 821 yards, and 2 scores. You project that out to a 16-game season, and you're talking about 1,095 yards.
Right.
So, to me, he's a guy that enters as a number one receiver, something the Eagles don't have. And I think that he's going to be a legitimate red zone target. I think that he's going to be a guy that, because of his outrageous catch radius, is going to be able to make catches from Carson Wentz that a lot of receivers in the past haven't been able to make around here. He's going to elevate the play of everyone else. And I also think that, assuming he stays healthy, it would take some sort of miracle for anyone else to lead this team in receptions, in my opinion.
See, that's where I disagree, because again, Alshon's been out, so take that into consideration. But Zach Ertz has caught 29 passes from Wentz, and he's been targeted 40 times. Now, that number might dip if Alshon was out there, and it presumably would. Sure. But I don't think it's dipping by much. Again, I think Ertz is going to be a guy that's going to catch the ball a ton, just because
I agree.
He has the so you think it's going to, but you said you think it'll take a miracle.
For him to, have better stats.
See, but that's the thing. I think you're setting the expectation stat-wise for Alshon too high. I think he can have a big impact on this team, and we could end the season and say he's the best receiver. I just don't necessarily think the stats are going to back that up, just because when you look, I just think he's going to draw attention and that type of thing, if he's playing at his best, in my opinion. So speaking of Matthews, a lot of talk about him this week, which we haven't had a chance to get into. So the two questions I want to ask you in debate are, first, I think we should do a little Jordan versus Alshon, just because we've had it before. And, look, one plays outside, one plays inside, but next offseason, the Eagles are going to have to make a decision. So let's start with that, but then also I want to get into the Nelson versus Alshon thing too. So, you asked me if I thought Alshon was the best receiver on the Eagles, and I hesitated, and it's because I hesitated with Jordan Matthews. So I'm going to read to you over their careers. Here's what each averages per season. So Alshon's played more, but here's what they average. Alshon, 1,277 yards, 87 catches, 8.5 touchdowns. Jordan Matthews, 935 yards, 76 catches, 8 touchdowns. So Alshon averages 11 more catches and roughly 300 more yards,
which is basically about 2 to 3 games worth of production more than Jordan Matthews.
Right.
So it's a significant difference.
Right. It's a difference. But so that, hold on, sorry, really quick. Let me look at what that was. Oh, no, sorry. So that was the career year of both. Here, so I misspoke. Let me take it back. Here's what each player averages for one season. So these are the actual averages. Jeffery, 60 catches, 909 yards, 5.2 touchdowns. Jordan Matthews, 15 catches, 891 yards, 6.3 touchdowns. So Matthew averages 15 more catches and 1 more touchdown than Jeffery does in his career, which I think is pretty interesting. Because when you talk about Alshon, I agree he's more talented, but Matthews has been just as productive, if not more productive. So how much do you weigh that when you're looking going forward? And it's kind of like what I said to you on a few podcasts ago. If I had to take a receiver for one game, I'm taking Alshon. If I had to bet who has more catches over the rest of their career, I would bet Jordan.
Wow. Okay. So you're saying that over the course of their entire career, If they're both here, both elsewhere,
both
one
anywhere,
here,
just
somewhere else, that Jordan Matthews would finish with more catches.
Yes.
See,
And maybe more touchdowns. He's more dependable, and in my opinion, he's more consistent than Alshon. Alshon has a higher ceiling. I don't disagree. But I think Jordan Matthews, if I'm investing $25 to $30 million into somebody, the knee with Jordan's a bit of a concern. But if I'm investing...
The fact that he's so limited and only plays in the slot is, to me, where I can't justify...
But if he's so limited, why is he producing comparable numbers?
Because he's been the Eagles' best receiver. Because there have
other than... But Alshon was. In the years out...
He also had Brandon Marshall. They also had, running backs who
in the last two backfield. In the last 2 years, where Jeffrey's been without question, we would agree that the last 2 years the Bears have not been a very good team. Correct. And they have not had a ton of talent. I think we could also say that about the Eagles.
Yep.
Right? Jordan Matthews has had better numbers than Jeffrey over the past 2 years. And we both think Wentz played well last year, but at the end of the day, Wentz
also only played in 12 games last year. So it's hard to
but I think you
compare
take
a 16-game season to a 12-game season.
Right.
And we're playing with a quarterback as dynamic as Carson Wentz, where he is...
But last year, Wentz was good at times, but he was not by any means...
I agree.
I
agree, but Jordan also was head and shoulders above the rest of the receivers.
But so was Alshon in Chicago. Would you agree with that? Besides
I'd have to go back and look at the rest of the receivers and their stats, but I think that, the fact that the Eagles basically only threw the football to Darren Sproles, Jordan Matthews, or Zach Ertz is going to increase the volume because he didn't have anybody else to throw the ball to.
See, my counter to that would be, though, is that I agree with you that Jordan Matthews has been their best receiver, but opposing defenses know that. I mean, they are... And I'm not saying you have to game plan hard to stop Jordan Matthews, but I am saying that if I'm the Washington Redskins and I'm getting ready to play the Eagles, I know that taking Jordan Matthews out, although I might not think it's going to be difficult, that is still what I go into the game trying to do. So for me, the fact that he has been targeted a lot and the fact that he has been their top option shouldn't diminish what he's accomplished. I mean, the numbers are still the numbers at the end of the day. So the other thing with Jordan Matthews is, to move on, there was Daniel Jeremiah of NFL Network, I believe, and a former Eagle scout who worked here with the Eagles, but then also worked with Joe Douglas in Chicago, I believe, or maybe Baltimore. But he has a history with Joe Douglas. Was at camp, and I don't know if he talked to someone and got this opinion or what made him think this, but he basically said Nelson Agholor is going to be the slot receiver. And he said he doesn't know what that means for Jordan Matthews. So what's your reaction to that?
I think that position, number one, is more up for grabs than it's ever been because Jordan has basically been the slot guy or the number one receiving option his entire career here. And I think that Nelson Agholor's strong camp has kind of opened the door for that job to be up for grabs. And I also don't think that the Eagles are in too much of a hurry to re-sign Jordan Matthews. Mm-hmm. I don't think that they're in too much of a hurry to showcase him and have him put up big numbers so that, he can go and get that big money contract elsewhere, or else they wouldn't have brought in Alshon Jeffery and Torrey Smith and Mac Hollins and Shelton Gibson.
Yeah, and that's, to me, the interesting part of this is the Eagles have financial reasons for Nelson to win this job.
Yep.
And Frank Reich said he really didn't didn't put the fire out by any means. He said he acknowledged the report yesterday that the situation with not just the slot receiver, but he was asked about that, is different than it's been in years past. So he was basically saying it's competition at every spot. To me, if Jordan Matthews is your guy, I think you give a little more of a definitive answer there.
And I don't think that he is at this point, or else they wouldn't have acted so aggressively to add so many receivers over the course of the offseason.
We should say, though, that Jordan Matthews has been getting all the reps as the starting receiver in the slot.
Yep.
So to this point, there's been no on-the-field indication that Nelson's going to take that job from him. The Eagles released their depth chart for the Packers game this week. Jordan Matthews was listed as the slot receiver, and Nelson was the top backup. Nelson's played well in camp, in my opinion. He's played very well this offseason. I think he was the team's best receiver during the offseason. I think you probably disagree with me on that, but I do think he had a very productive offseason in terms of catches and touchdowns and stuff so far. So he has looked very good. I mean, I think you're not going to be surprised to hear me say I'm not ready to just hand him the starting slot job and trade Jordan, just because Nelson's a guy that I think has to show it consistently for at least 7 or 8 games until it's completely out of his head. Nelson is very talented, don't get me wrong. Mike Quick, a guy who obviously knows a thing or two about receivers, says he thinks Nelson Agholor, including Alshon, is the most talented receiver on the team. So Nelson has the ability. The question is, at what point do the Eagles feel confident enough to trust him?
I think he's going to have to show it throughout the preseason and into the regular season if there isn't a move that's made with Jordan Matthews before that. And listen, I agree with you.
And that would be risky.
And I agree with you that Nelson Aguilar, I don't know that he was more impressive than Alshon Jeffery, because when Alshon was on the field, I thought he made some absolute circus catches, and it just seemed like he was on the field, it elevated the play of the rest of the passing game, and I think that's going to have a big impact on Carson Wentz. But I will give Nelson Aguilar this. He looked stronger than ever during this camp. He ran crisper routes. He looked more reliable in terms of catching passes in traffic, and he was one of the standouts in that first Lincoln Financial Field open practice during training camp.
Yep.
So he's had a really solid offseason, and that's where I think that if the Eagles are bowled over by a trade offer for a cornerback, which I don't think is going to come, or a top flight draft pick where you can get an asset in return for Jordan Matthews, I think Nelson Aguilar makes them think about that, but I don't think that they're just going to hand Nelson Aguilar that starting job as long as Jordan's on the roster.
The thing about trading Jordan, though, is like you look at this receiving core. We've talked about Alshon at length, but I think even you could agree, at minimum, Alshon is a little bit of a wild card. You don't know exactly what you're going to get from him. Torrey Smith, I think you can say the same thing. Nelson, you can say the same thing. The Matt Collins, Shelton Gibson, Marcus Johnson, those guys, have really yet to even play. I mean, Matt Collins and Shelton have not. Marcus Johnson has not appeared in a regular season game, I don't believe. So those guys, you really have no idea what you're going to get. Jordan Matthews,
I think you know what you're going to get out of Alshon Jeffery if he's healthy. I mean, what, if he's on the field, what are the variables and what are the concerns about Alshon Jeffery?
Well, I think one of the concerns at this point is he's not really practiced with the team during training camp. I think
if he's healthy, I mean, I'm saying that if he's healthy on the field,
if he's healthy, that doesn't change the fact he still missed 2 weeks of training camp. I mean,
I think we're overvaluing 8 practices.
Maybe
for a guy who has done it before and shown that he can be a number one.
Right. Okay. But I guess what I'm saying is, I think Jordan Matthews heading in right now, I think is the receiver that you know the most what you're going to get from him. Would you agree with that?
Because he's been here for 3 years, sure.
Yeah.
But I don't think that makes Alshon Jeffery any sort of wild card, because you know what you have in him. You know the type of receiver he is, and he's an established top flight, probably top 15 receiver in the NFL.
Okay. Well, last 2 years, what he's been has not been what Eagles fans are expecting. But I just think, I guess my ultimate point, not to get back into the Alshon thing, but my ultimate point is, I just think trading Jordan Matthews people mention Kyle Fuller. I wouldn't trade Jordan Matthews for Kyle Fuller. I think trading Jordan Matthews is a risk because he has a great relationship with Carson, and I think there's that dependability there. And I don't think the receiver core is as stacked as people think. I think there's way more potential and talent than there was last year, but I don't think there's not as many sure things as people think. So I'd be hesitant to simply trade Jordan and put Nelson in there, because Nelson, look, I wrote he was the best receiver of the offseason. So, you're not going to see me sitting here saying I'm shocked to see Nelson play well. I just don't think they should be at a point yet where they're confident enough in Nelson to trade Jordan. Obviously if you get maybe a top flight cornerback type of deal, but I don't think that offer's coming, like you said. So going into that, off the Jordan Matthews thing, the Eagles, like we said at the beginning, are actually playing a game. Whether Alshon will be there, we don't know. Whether Jordan Matthews will be there, we don't know. I would think he would. Doug has not said who's going to play really besides Carson Wentz. So
if I'm Doug, I'm playing the starters for 6 or 7 plays, and I'm getting them out of there. I mean, we've seen other teams across the NFL not even play their starters in the preseason opener, and I think that,
Aaron Rodgers is not playing.
Right, and I think that's smart. I think the more you can limit your starting players in meaningless preseason games from injury risk or otherwise, I think it's the smart thing to do.
Yeah, so let's assume let's take the starters out of this a little bit, because even if obviously I guess we want to see how Timmy Jernigan looks, that type of deal. If the defensive line has 2 sacks and 7 plays, that'll be something to clearly to note. But besides that, what are you looking for? Maybe give me one guy on offense and one guy on defense you're kind of looking for.
I think the one guy on defense, it's an easy one. It's Derek Barnett. He's probably not going to be with the first-team defense, but I want to see him with that second unit. The bend that all of his teammates talk about, the explosive get-off. Can he get into the backfield, get a sack, force some hurries? How is he setting the edge in the run game? And then on offense, I'm really interested to see if Wendell Smallwood, if he plays, because he's been injured the last couple of days here, but if Wendell Smallwood plays, I want to see if he has that ferocious, downhill, angry running style in a preseason game, if that translates from what we've seen over the last week or so of practices, where I don't think it's a stretch to say that he's been the most impressive offensive player since the pads went on.
Yeah, I don't think that's a stretch either. On defense, for me, there's a few guys. I mean, the first guy that popped in my head was C.J. Smith, just because I think he, among the cornerbacks, I mean, Jalen Mills and Patrick Robinson are the starters as of now. They were on the depth chart as the starters, and they probably will start on Thursday. C.J. Smith, to me, is a guy that has the best chance of taking over Patrick Robinson's job. I'd like to see how C.J. Smith played. He had a great preseason last year, so it wouldn't shock me to see him play well. On offense, it's a little tougher. Marcus Johnson, because he'll probably start with Alshon out, and I think he's a guy that will play past when the starters sit out.
Yep.
So I do think you'll see a lot of reps from him. Isaac Samalu, I know we're saying not starters. Let me back that up a little bit. Shelton Gibson, a guy that I think's improved over these past 2 days, has done a good job catching the ball. If he catches one long pass, for 40 yards where he displays that speed, things could really change quick here in terms of his chances of making the team.
And I think that would change a lot for him because he's the type of player who relies on confidence, similar
very
to Nelson
obvious.
Aguilar.
He's very clear about it, too.
And he hasn't been confident. He hasn't really had his sea legs underneath him when it comes to knowing this offense, knowing the playbook. And I think that's why some of these drops have been happening. But I'm with you. I think that if he's going to stick, if he's going to have any chance of making this roster, he needs to come out and have a very strong preseason.
Yeah, and the other position, just real quick before we wrap this up, the linebacker position to me is not the most exciting in terms of camp battles. A lot of the guys behind Jordan Hicks and Nigel Bradham are not really long-term prospects. The position, I guess Joe Walker might be, but a lot of those guys are special teams guys. But when I put together my 53-man roster, picking the linebackers to me is one of the toughest parts. So I'll be interested to see which linebackers really separate themselves either defensively or on special teams. I think that'll play a big role.
Yep.
So here we are, men. It's Tuesday. 2 more days until the game on Thursday. We're going to try to do one. We'll both be at Lambeau Field.
Yep.
We're going to try to do one right after the game. So Friday morning, check in your once you subscribe, as you should, check in your iTunes, and we should have one ready to go for you. Once again, we're on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, iHeartRadio, Google Play, and Spreaker. And since Doug's undefeated in the preseason, I guess we'll be sitting here talking about a win, and we'll be talking about what we've seen and all those things. So thanks, everybody, for listening. And, Matt, I'll talk to you soon.
Sounds good, my man.